Welcome back to another week of the Taproot Podcast. This week I've got Marcus Miller with me, and we are going to be talking about management safety walks. Are they meaningful or are they an empty waste of time? So Marcus, what's a safety walk and which is it, meaningful or empty?
Well, I think it all depends on the execution, right? But these safety walks, they're really a way for management, supervisors, upper management to get involved, to walk through the workplace and look specifically for any kind of unsafe conditions so they can have a profound effect on the safety of the workplace.
So they can discipline the people that broke a rule. That's what they're doing audits for,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah, they're policing. So their other title is police officers within the company.
Okay. So is that meaningful or wasteful?
Well, again, I think it all depends on the execution and how you execute those safety walks. It could be both, right? But you have to choose on your commitment to the process.
So in my experience, and I've had a lot of different, I've been through the dog and pony show a couple times for different levels of leadership, from C-suite, vice presidents, directors, plant managers. I used to do management safety walks. I have a lot of different stories from this about it being a waste of time a lot of the time, at least from the operations level. Boy, did it feel like a waste of time for sometimes. We would have, people coming through, vice presidents, and we'd have to clean up the area and make it look pretty and presentable. And then they'd leave and it would go right back to what it was a week before.
It sounds like a parade.
A little bit of a parade, dog and pony show. I used to call it the fluff and buff. So if you had a big manager in there, your boss was coming on to you and saying, hey, we got to make sure there are no rags out, make sure everything's cleaned up. If we got to repaint, we're going to repaint the week before they come. I saw a ton of that.
So did you get feedback from the frontline workers? Like when that would happen, like did they understand the purpose, or did they see through that dog and pony show and were like, oh, let's just get this done?
So I had it at a couple different levels, and sometimes when it was me, when it was actually like, I was in more of a managerial position, one of the things I had to do is explain to people why we had to do the fluff and buff, because a lot of the times when management was coming through, what they were doing is looking at opportunities in the plant and what capacity you had. And if you looked like a well-run shop, you might get more budget, you might get more opportunities for more product. So from a management standpoint internally, you had to do the fluff and buff. You had to do this dog and pony show, because if somebody came in and saw something wrong, well, that was going to impact you. Now, that's not necessarily safety. That's what
I was just about to ask.
That could be
so how did that
type.
tie into safety and making sure the workforce understands that safety is a priority, not, well, let's do this to acquire the budget we need to make the changes we think we need to make.
Yeah, so I think there is a difference definitely when it's maybe a purely safety, but it also always depends on what level is coming in to do this audit. Because again, anytime you had vice president, directors, any of those corporate people coming in, they also had a safety component that they would go and look at. But at my facility, at the very least, we generally had a very good culture of, we were keeping our gloves on, keeping our PPE properly worn. We had a relatively clean area, and kept out trip hazards and things like that. So we had a pretty good process internally of keeping our facility in a good state. But it was always the little things that you were, making sure that all the fine details, the dirty rags, the other little things that you had to do. So some of those, maybe the major safety stuff we didn't find very often, but there's definitely concern of what you had to do. You had to put on the show.
So if you're putting on a show, does that mean that when you're not putting on a show, were conditions different? Like, did you have to really prepare for this? And should you have to prepare for some kind of event like this where a safety walk comes through and then everybody talks about, well, how do we pass this? What do we need to do? Shouldn't it already be done?
So I think some of those, I always ask my people, if the guys left, I say, guys, look how clean it is. Shouldn't it be this way all the time? Yeah. Can't we keep it this way?
That's real world.
Yeah. I think of also, I don't know if you've ever seen like one of those little videos of like the safety guy pulls up to the site and suddenly you hear like the hoo 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 hoo, you know, like the little signal goes out. Everybody starts putting on their safety gear and stuff because the safety man arrived on site. So I think there is an element of, you know, people want to cover up for problems. And it just depends on if you've created the right culture from leadership on the purpose of these. Yeah. Because I think if you're being inconsistent with them, as in, you know, you're not doing, let's say it's a pure safety walk. If me as a manager of a department is not being consistent about doing that task, doing that audit, then I don't know what signal I'm sending to people, but it's not that I care about it.
No, it's hey, we'll do this if we get the time to do it.
Yeah, I do it at the end of the month just because I got to check it off or else I get chewed out, you know.
And if it's inconsistent, it's just, there's so much, I guess, people just want to maybe pencil whip it. Like, it's not important enough to really have a schedule, but get routine with it. It's just something we got to do to show that, yeah, this may be important, maybe not, because we're not really doing it really well or consistently.
I think an easy way to detect that is just to look at when they're done. So, you know, we noticed with behavior-based safety audits, peer audits, that they will all, we would have, you get a couple every week, and then at the last week of the month, you have, you know, 80% of them come in because everybody's going, oh crap, I have to get this done for this month. And so you can look at what shifts it's happening on. Is it happening on all the different shifts? So when I was a manager, I would have to come in early to do an audit on night shift. And so I would do that frequently. I'd be getting in the plant at 3 in the morning to go do an audit of night shift and see how things are running when nobody thinks you're coming in. Or, you know, checking in the afternoons and things like that. You had to kind of make sure that the audits weren't just all happening when the resources were there. You know, day shift got all the audits because that's when engineering or management was available. Yeah. So you have to be purposeful with it. You have to be consistent about doing them and treating them like they're not a end of the month item, but something that you do to be consistent as a part of your culture that you develop.
Right, because if you're not, you're sending the wrong message to your workforce. Like, they don't understand the real purpose of doing those is to really be able to affect real change, to make the workers more supportive, make it more likely they're going to get their jobs done right the first time, and get done safely. So if you're not doing it consistently, if it's just superficial, like you're just going through it and checking off a box, it's sending a completely wrong message to the employees, I would think, because now they just see it as something they got to get through.
Well, and
not something they're really engaged with.
I think also with the superficial too, what you're looking at. There was research done that was looking at, you know, they kind of cloud mapped all of their audit findings from safety audits, and the same things were coming up, not because they were particularly like the most dangerous, but it was a lot of low risk things relative to, you know, they were a high risk activity. I think it was a tree, a company that would cut down trees for utilities. I think it was something like that. So dangerous work.
Yeah.
You know, one of the most dangerous jobs is you know, cutting down trees. Check out that video. But one of the most dangerous jobs is cutting down trees. And you know, when they looked at their audits, they were finding the same kind of like low-level PPE or those kind of findings. They weren't noticing things like drop zones, and they weren't noticing different, maybe not more critical, but just stronger safeguards that needed to be checked and in place before work began. They were really just looking for kind of the superficial stuff they had been trained to look for.
Right. So they're just relying on their own skill, their own training, their memory to get it right.
Yeah.
So how do you fix that?
So I think, you know, one method is kind of establishing what are the safeguards that need to be audited, what are the most important ones. Because again, if you just kind of leave it up to what people think are important or what they're easiest to audit, because sometimes it's about ease of audit. And I can tell really quickly if you're not wearing your hard hat and glasses. It might be harder for me to tell if a critical safeguard is actually functioning properly. So some of those things can be difficult. Now, you know, you run an audit course that we do. What are some things that help people for maybe you have a hazard. How do I find those safeguards to look for? What's kind of the approach that we put for that?
Well, first of all, I think you have to get away from relying on people's skill, memory, and training, right? You got to take that out of the equation, or your results are going to be all over the place. So having some intent on what you're going to look for, planning for what you're going to look for, maybe kind of reviewing past safety incidents, maybe employee feedback, and be intent. Work with a safety professional and put together a checklist. Here's what we're going to focus on. Here's some of the trends that we're seeing. Our next round of audits, let's go ahead and put together a checklist of what we need to look at and how do we engage our employees so they feel part of the process, that we're not just coming in and telling them, oh, here's what you're doing wrong, and create a culture of, oh, they're just trying to catch us doing something wrong. Instead of, let's take a look and be purposeful on what we're looking at and what we want to be sure is working right and identify if it's not. And once we identify it, let's get the people involved. Let's talk to them about why. Are we creating a culture where the pace is more important than being safe? Getting the work done is more important than doing it safely. And if we find that in our audits, ask our employee, how do we balance that? How do we balance our need for productivity with the need of being safe? Because they'll have ideas. They're doing the job every single day, right? And I think it's important as we're going through this to make sure that people know you don't tell people what they want to hear as you do this, right? You don't promise them anything that you can't deliver, because this has to be a transparent process. It has to be an honest process, and it has to be an avenue where there's two-way communications between employees and management. So all the conditions that need addressed, employees are comfortable giving that information. Because if they're trying to protect themselves, if they're trying to protect coworkers, if they're just trying to get through it, management's not going to get the information they need to make a real change, right? It's just going to be a check in the box that we did it. And then everybody's surprised when a safety incident happens because we're like, hey, we just audited this place. But it was either very superficial, or it wasn't well planned out, or it's, we're just checking a box to get through it.
Now, when I think about the purpose of audits, we have a lot of different courses where we kind of talk on these things. I know you run a 2-day audit course for using Taproot for audits. We talk about it in the Stop a Human Error course that I run at the summit. In both of those courses, I think helping people understand that the purpose of audit is not just that policing that we say at the beginning. It's not always about, are you following the rules or not? And if you're not, you're in trouble. A lot of people approach audits that way, that it's pure compliance. I'm in here to check this list, and if you're not in compliance, you got to fix it or you're in trouble. I think an important thing to think about with audits, especially safety walks, is the purpose of them. It's not about necessarily compliance or people wearing their PPE or not. It's about demonstrating what you care for. What is important to management, and how do we get them to demonstrate that safety is important? And so, I kind of think of, there's a Rickover story, Admiral Rickover, where he would come on to do these very detailed, very thorough audits in a nuclear vessel. So he'd come on the submarines or the ships, carriers, whatever it is. He would go on, and one of the things he would look for is he'd look for wet paint. Now, what would wet paint tell you about that ship? If there's wet paint when the admiral in charge comes to do the inspection,
that they're just getting ready for the inspection. It's not normal.
That something was abnormal. They've done something extra to make this inspection a certain way. So whenever he found wet paint, he knew he had to be extra thorough in this, because there was a level of show that had been put in place for him. Yeah. And so he had to go out of his way. He had to go look at specific, maybe a different subsystem that wouldn't normally be looked at, because he wanted to make sure that he was, really assessing the, discipline and the health of the ship, and not just looking at it from this is the checklist.
Right.
I had another person, maybe it might have been Tim, actually. He and I were talking about this. I think it was Tim Diggs. He used to do this. He would look at the microwave in the break room. So he would go check out the break room, because if the break room was a mess and was dirty, that's a good sign that it's a not well-maintained facility. So bathrooms, break rooms, anything like that is just a good indicator of, if they're not willing to keep their bathroom or break rooms very clean, they're probably not doing some of the other major things that they need to do, the fine detail stuff.
Yeah, it's an insight to their culture,
Yeah.
right? And I think Admiral Rickover got it exactly right. I mean, if you're going into that detail and people are figuring out, oh, these guys are serious about finding issues, and the results of those type of audits result in companies being so more supportive of the employees getting the job done and helping them save time and effort and doing it the right way. I think that goes a long way to change your culture into where employees start to share their ideas and concerns because they know it's going to have an effect. I think another probably precursor to knowing that your culture needs fixed is when the audits are done and your corrective actions come out, and you see the corrective actions you typically see in reactive investigations. We just find out people are doing it wrong. So here's your discipline. Here's your retraining. Here's more rules you have to deal with. And I think that also will show you that, hey, you need to spend some time fixing the culture of your audits or your walkthroughs, because right now you're just policing and you're dealing with trying to fix people, right? Instead of trying to fix the systems that they work in order to make it easier for them to do their job safely.
Yeah. And I can think of, I remember my facility, one of the things that we had these, they're basically wooden platforms that people would stand on to work at a machine.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a series of steps, and it wasn't over a certain height that you had to have railings, but it was kind of at that borderline of like, this is high enough that if I fell off I could get hurt, but I'm not going to die from it, but it's I could probably get hurt. It's kind of at the stage height, it's the stage height for like, does it really need railings or not? So we had, I had a person, I was doing one of my walks, and I had one of the guys say, he's like, this is really high. I really think we should have railings. And as a manager, if somebody brings up a safety concern, one, it's a good sign that they trust you. But two, you have to take action. So it's like, I can't go 6 months and not do anything. It was like, oh, that's probably a good idea. I'm going to grab our safety guy and have him come out, look at it, measure it, see what kinds of railing would be best for this, and he'll put it. And he got it put in I would say about a week and a half. It wasn't long. It was fast. He turned around and got what we needed and got it ordered and put in. And so I think that's the kind of thing that you want to have, is you want to have people be able to bring up those challenges and really speak to what could we do and what do we need to do? How do I demonstrate that it's important to me?
Right, and that's the perfect way, showing them results from the information that they give you. When they see that you follow through on the information they're giving you, they're going to be more engaged the next time, right? They're going to be part of that process. And then the accountability increases because everybody's accountable to this process now. It's not just the manager coming in and saying, hey, here's what we got to do, and everybody rolls their eyes and say, well, that's just going to make my job harder. He doesn't understand. It actually builds a team that everybody's responsible for safety at that point.
Yeah, that kind of comes back to another Rickover. He always said responsibility starts at the top. And he always said, like, the captain is responsible. In his case, he was talking about nuclear safety, responsible for the nuclear safety of the ship. And he can delegate tasks. So he can give to the nuclear chief engineer the responsibility for maintaining and running the reactor, but he is still as equally responsible for its performance and for its safety as the nuclear engineer. It doesn't diminish when I give you a responsibility. And that's the way it goes down through the organization. So yeah, there's a guy that's working at the panel and he's responsible for it, but everyone in his chain of command above him is equally as responsible at making sure that he has what he needs to be successful. And I always think about that when it came to things like, PPE use and adherence. Does the management care?
Yeah.
How do they demonstrate that they care? Do they just tell them you should wear it? Or when they go out on the walks, do they have a conversation about it and how it's important? And ask them if it's working the way they want it to. Because a lot of times PPE use or any rule that's being broken, people are breaking it because there's something getting in the way. And if you're not engaging them, if you're just saying, put those gloves on, but you're not asking, hey, what's causing you to not wear the gloves today? you might be missing opportunities for fixing things in your system. And that's what I think really demonstrating what you care for makes the difference between, kind of just walking the walk and really just, making it, like you said, symbolic status parade or a superficial, kind of walk.
Well, I know a lot of employees, and you probably heard this before, they really don't know how much you care, right? They don't care how much you know. You know what I'm saying? Like, people don't understand how much you care. And if you can't show them you care through your actions, then you're going to get stuck in a culture that's not going to be safe.
Yeah, you can't have a safety talking culture. You have to have a culture that actually gets out there. Again, I'm on the Rickover kick right now, but he always would say, you get what you inspect, not what you expect. Yeah. So I can say and lay out my expectations for what I want you to do, but if I'm not willing to go out and actually, confirm things or check things or have a conversation at least about it more than one time, you're just not going to see compliance at the level that you want. I mean, there are people that will follow the rules just because it is the rules, but there's always a group of people that needs to understand the why to actually follow things.
And it's a sign of a great manager if you can explain that why. If you take the time and you talk to them about why this is important, what you're doing, and you follow through, you walk the talk, right? You do what you say you're going to do. That just shows everybody that this is important, and we're going to follow through with this, and you're going to get out of it what you put into it, right? If you go through the motions, like they say, garbage in, garbage out. If you're feeding garbage into the machine, it's going to produce bad results. So take accountability, make sure that you walk the talk, that you engage your employees so they have purpose in the process, so they take responsibility and accountability for it, then your program's going to work fine.
And I think you have to be really careful on the signals that you're sending to. I can think of an audit that I went through, and it's one that sticks in my head, and I've told it before on the podcast, but it was an important one to me. We had two different corporate people coming in. So one was a director level, and the VP was coming in like a week or a month later. So, I mean, it was like back to back almost. And the director had come through, and we were talking through and walking in an area, and he saw one of the machines was not in cycle. And these are critical machines. They were like, these were the ones that he was there to see, kind of thing. And he noticed one wasn't in cycle, and he asked about it. He said, why is that not in cycle? And we said, well, there's a reason over there for, basically at the time, there was parts that were running that were getting measured, and we had a really small order quantity. So when that part was getting measured, the machine had to sit because we couldn't tear it down. We couldn't load another part because we only had one in the order. So we couldn't do the next job until that part got confirmed on size. And so he said, well, when the next guy comes, if there's a case like that, close the door, turn the coolant on. Makes it look like it's running. And I that struck me. It struck me very hard because to me, what did it say? It said it's better to cover up a problem than to answer for it, because there's a reason, and
a good reason.
I don't know if I'd say it's the reason, but it's a problem, and it was a problem in our facility because we have all these one-piece orders that would come through, and those one-piece orders cause holdups like this where I have an extra 30 minutes that had to be sitting not making product because it was running on this measuring device. And that's an issue. Part of it ties back to quality problems. If we scrapped a part, it had to run a one-piece replacement order through. There's all these little things that were happening. And instead of stopping and saying, let's have a conversation about why we have so many one-piece orders in this shop, and is there things that we can do to mitigate, which is what really the leadership should have been saying. And, that was, we'll cover it up so they don't ask the question. Because appearance of it is as important as, appearance of productivity is important as actually what's the reality.
Right.
And that always struck me with audits and those. I never liked the dog and pony show because of that fact. Because it's like it missed the opportunities for really digging into the system problems that are causing this thing. Because he's right to notice, hey, this machine is stopped. That's a good observation, the problem is the the actual demonstrating accountability, as you said, of what you want us to take action with was to cover up, not address.
Well, isn't it easier just to address the symptoms instead of really analyzing?
Yeah.
The true
Well,
problem?
on my plant manager's behalf, he came back on top of it and was like, "Look, I think that's actually we need to address this as a bigger problem." Now, the other guy didn't, but our plant manager was a sharp guy, and I always respected him from. He was the type that would, if he was going to go out and audit, and I remember this a lot. If we were going to report out like let's say we had a safety incident, we put in place a corrective action of this or that. I knew for a fact he would go on the floor. Not only would he check that it was done, but he would also go ask people about it. And so he was always about demonstrating that care. And so to me, that always sticks in the difference between, are you going to fix this problem or cover it up? And audits are not about cover-ups. They're about understanding. And that's why we recommend doing good root cause analysis with your audit findings, whether it's a safety observation or it's something more formalized.
So I guess that leads to a good question in my mind. Like when, in your experience, a lot of your walkthroughs and stuff dealt with safety and quality at the same time. So does that send a message to the workforce that both are important, neither are important? Should you set up safety only walkthroughs, or should you try to do an all-encompassing walkthrough? Does it lose effectiveness?
So I think there's times for each thing, but the closer you are, so a direct supervisor, I mean everything you're auditing, you're trying to just keep it all running. Your next level management, your ops managers, your plant managers, I think the higher up you go, the more deliberate you need to be in what you're observing and what things you're looking at. So to me, you have to do that prep work and you have to figure out what's the specific purpose in what you're auditing. So I was like, mid-management level of, I had multiple divisions with different supervisors across different shifts. So for me, it was about making sure I'm being consistent across shifts. I'm looking and talking to people. So I had to cover quality. I had to cover safety. I had to cover operations because all of that was under my responsibility for my departments. But if you looked at plant manager, he's not doing the same detailed level walk, but he's got to have an idea of what are the top priorities from safety, from quality, and from operations. But he's probably not at the same level of detail that I am. And so we did different levels of walks, but the main thing was figuring out what was the most important thing that each level was really looking at. So to me, if you get too broad, if I was a corporate person coming in to do an audit, I think I would probably take time for the plant manager and say, hey, what are the biggest initiatives that you have that you've rolled out recently that you want me to check the health of and check in on, and do something like that to get that health kind of check, and then do something to look at kind of some of the general walks. So you kind of do like an opportunities, a health check, and there's always general. Like, again, everybody should be looking at PPE. Everybody should be looking at are people following the basic rules that we set forth in our operations.
But you're being intentional. You're planning for it. You're taking a look at past. You're looking at trends, and then each audit has its own. Like you're making its own purpose.
Yep.
Right. It's not just the same thing every time where people get used to doing what they need to do to just get through it.
I mean, there are some audits that are like that. So you have a little more compliance. We had blocks that had to be calibrated. There were things that had to be calibrated in the shop. And there were audits that you had to do where you went and checked that. And that was part of like a more formalized check sheet audit that you had to do, is to make sure that those things in the shop were correct and weren't out of date. And so you had those type of audits, more compliance-based audits, but I didn't see those drive a lot of change or drive a lot of culture. Those were more to just make sure that the general rules were being maintained, because it's difficult when you've got thousands and thousands of these little blocks all over the place with a little date note on it. It's hard to, you can't just trust that it's going to be captured and people are going to turn them in properly. They get stuck in a drawer or they get set on a counter. So you got to have those opportunities. There are audits that are basically like we're just maintaining things. So I think maintenance audits are one, but I think really leadership audits are really about demonstrating culture. And so that's really what you should be keeping in mind when you're doing some of those, is what is the culture you're trying to set, and how are you going to fix problems that you find. Because I know a lot of audits where their fix is put your PPE on and do better next time. And that's not a fix. It's an okay, it might get them to wear it today, but it's really limiting and not asking the questions that you need to ask to say, why are we not getting compliance? What do we need to do to get to fix our system that's allowing these problems to occur?
Okay, and I think if you do this the right way, you do identify the problems that need to be fixed instead of just trying to fix people or fixing the symptoms that you're seeing. So if you can be intentional with these, like every time you start to do an audit, talk to your people, figure out your trends, make sure you know what you want to look for, where you can make the biggest impact. Make sure you engage your employee, make them part of the process. Make sure that you get their information on, how do you make their job easier or safer, and go with that. Make sure you hold yourself accountable to following through with the information that you find, and do it routinely, right? Don't just do it when you have to do it because time's running out. Like, if it's important, it's important. So there should be a structure to when you go through this, so everybody sees, hey, this is really important because we do it at this time every time, right? At least put some structure so it's easy to do. And then I think you've got to incorporate safety into just broader leadership strategies, right? I know there's an executive team I work with that even though they're in a corporate office, they still start every meeting with a safety moment, right? Something they've learned, a lesson learned. And that kind of gives them the moral authority. So when they're out there looking, they can say, yeah, we do this too, right? Yep. And it makes it more than just kind of a flavor of the month. It makes it a value of the company. So if you can follow those best practices, you're going to identify issues, right? And that's a good thing. And the other good thing about that is if you are using Taproot, well, the process is the same for finding the root causes of poor audit findings or findings during your safety walk. It's the same process. You don't have to learn anything new. You don't have to be a human performance expert to fix it. You just follow the Taproot process and methodology, use the RCA tools, and you're going to be able to come up with some really good ideas to help your people be more successful and safer.
Well, let's say I'm a person who's primarily doing audits, not safety related. I want to look at audits. What's the best opportunity coming up for them to learn how to apply Taproot to audits?
Well, I think there is a specific audit course that we can put on. If you have 10 or more people that are interested in learning Taproot, we can come to your site. We can go to the site, we send an instructor, and we can talk about how to handle some of these audit findings and really some of the best practices we talked about today. How do we incorporate them? But the process is the same as if you're doing a reactive investigation on an incident. You're just looking for the human mistakes that cause the poor audit finding, maybe equipment failures that cause the poor audit finding. You identify those, you get as much information, the context, the conditions around those mistakes, and then you take that through root cause analysis. You use the evidence to drive your analysis so you can truly find the root causes, the underlying root causes of why people are making mistakes or your equipment's failing, so you can put in very effective corrective actions so we can prevent those mistakes from happening again, or in an audit's case, prevent them from happening in real life and causing an incident. We get ahead of it.
So they can attend, we can come on site, or they can come to the Taproot Summit and attend. You've got a auditing and proactive, using Taproot proactively or for audits course, 2-day that you put on there at the pre-summit. They can also come to a 5-day Taproot. I know we talk about being proactive and how to use it proactively in that advanced team leader training. So I think those are both great opportunities for people who are wanting to look at how do they make their audits, their safety walks, and other talks more meaningful and more valuable to their organization.
I do. I think the summit's incredibly important to come to if you're Taproot trained, or if you want to get Taproot trained, to learn these best practices. Because I truly feel like if you're using Taproot proactively with your audits, you're going to have a much better record, right? And safety records are really important. Sometimes it either is going to get you business or not get you business, right? So if you can get ahead of these problems and put these best practices and corrective actions in place before a real world incident hits you because you identified it with the audits, like the purpose of doing audits are, well, then you're going to come out better than getting somebody hurt, getting somebody killed, because nobody wants to go through that. So if we can find these precursor incidents or find these problems during our audits, well, then we're going to be much better off. And the good news is it's the same process, right? You don't have to learn anything new.
Well, thank you, Marcus, for taking the time today. If you guys have any other questions, there's other resources that we've got, other videos related to leadership and audits. You can check those out in our podcast list below. And check out the Taproot website if you want to see the upcoming courses or the Taproot Summit. You can see those links down below. As always, subscribe for more and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next Taproot podcast.